Reed liked the quiet. The outer woods of Celesta 4 gave him just that, miles of unbroken trees, snow-blanketed valleys, and the silence only deep space could promise. His small wooden cabin stood alone on a ridge, surrounded by a frozen forest that muffled all sound. Some said the planet was cursed, its storms unpredictable, its winters cruel, but Reed had learned to live with it. Out here there were no politics, no orders, no one to disappoint or be disappointed by. He sipped hot tea as the wind howled past his cabin, making the wooden walls groan under its weight. Tonight, the storm was different, wilder, more alive, like it was hunting something. Reed stood by the window, squinting through the falling snow. White upon white stretched endlessly until even the trees blurred into the blizzard. Just as he turned away from the window, the sound came. A cry faint, brittle, nearly buried by the storm, but unmistakably a child's. Reed froze. He pressed his ear to the wood. Again another cry, not animal, not wind, a voice. Without a second thought, he threw on his thick coat, grabbed his flashlight, and yanked open the door. Cold slapped him instantly like a wall of knives, but he moved forward, boots sinking into deep snow. "Hellos," he called, "anyone out there?" The wind answered with a scream, but the cry came again, weaker this time. Reed pushed forward, flashlight cutting a path through the swirling white. Every few steps he paused to listen. The terrain was uneven, the snow covering roots and rocks that threatened to trip him, but he didn't stop. The cries grew clearer, guiding him like a beacon. Then he saw it, a small figure crumpled near a fallen log, half buried in snow. Reed rushed forward, heart hammering. It was a child, not human. Skin the color of frost-kissed lavender, two thin limbs shaking violently, lips a dull blue. The child barely looked 5 years old. Their eyes fluttered open, silver and shimmering with fear. The child spoke, voice barely audible. The words were foreign, but the pain in them was universal. Reed didn't hesitate. He stripped off his coat and wrapped the child tightly. The body was frighteningly light. "I've got you," he murmured, "hang on." He turned back toward the cabin, moving quickly despite the storm. The wind fought him, but he held the child close, shielding them with his body. When he reached the door, he slammed it shut behind him, the warmth of the fire rushing to meet them. He laid the child on a blanket near the flames and added more wood until the fire roared. He grabbed towels, warmed water, and began rubbing the child's arms and legs, trying to coax life back into them. "Come on, kids, stay with me." A cough, then another, the child twitched. "That's it, you're safe now." Reed spooned warm broth into their mouth slowly. The child sipped, hands trembling. He smiled, relieved. "What's your name?" The child blinked, whispered one word, "Means." "Means," Reed repeated, "is that your name?" The child shook his head slowly, "Mama." "Mara, is that your mother's name?" A nod, then the child began to cry, quiet, muffled sobs that tore into Reed's chest. "We'll find her," Reed said softly, "I promise." That night Reed stayed awake by the fire, watching the child sleep. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin felt warm, alive. He didn't know where Mara was. He didn't know what species this child belonged to. He only knew one thing. If he hadn't answered the cry, the child would have died. And that was unacceptable. Morning came gray and silent. The storm had passed, leaving the forest buried under a fresh blanket of snow. Trees bent under the weight, and the sky hung low with clouds that promised more. Reed packed his emergency gear, flares, med supplies, water, and food rations. He pulled on his thickest boots, checked his rifle just in case, and looked down at the child still asleep beside the fire. "I'll be back," he whispered. "I'm going to find your mom." He retraced his steps into the woods, past the log where he'd found Mean. His eyes scanned for signs, footprints, disturbances, anything that broke the symmetry of snow. After an hour, he found them. Staggered footprints, barely visible, leading deeper into the woods. They were too large to be Mean's. Someone had been limping. He followed the trail for 20 minutes until he found her. An alien woman curled against the base of a tree, arms wrapped around her stomach, skin the same frost lavender as the boy. Her hair was frozen, her clothing ripped and stiff with ice. Reed knelt beside her. "Marva." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Her lips were blue. He checked her pulse. "Still alive." He scooped her up gently and turned back. At the cabin, Mean was awake and sitting up, eyes wide as Reed kicked open the door, carrying his mother. "Mama." "She's alive," Reed said, "but she needs warmth now." He laid her by the fire and repeated the process, towels, water, heating packs. Mean sat beside her, whispering in a language Reed didn't understand. Hours passed, then her fingers twitched. "Maine," she whispered. The boy sobbed and hugged her tightly. "Mama." She opened her eyes fully, locking onto Reed, her body tensed. No hurt. I won't, Reed said gently. I brought you here, your son found me. Mara looked at him, exhausted and afraid, then back at her son. Later, wrapped in blankets and sipping broth, her voice cracked. Why help aliens? Because you needed help. She shook her head. My people closed doors, said Storm would take weak ones, no room for broken families. Reed frowned, so they left you. My mate died last season, they say I slow them down, I took my child, ran, Storm came, I fell. Reed's jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty, but this, abandoning a mother and child in a storm, was monstrous. You're not nothing, he said. You're a mother, you're brave, and you're alive. Mara stared at him, a long, unblinking look, then a whisper. You saved what I love most. Reed smiled softly. No, he saved you, I just answered his cry. That night the storm outside faded, but inside something else had begun, the first spark of trust. The fire flickered, casting golden light over the three of them. A man who had chosen solitude, a woman cast out by her own kind, and a child who had cried loud enough to change everything. Reed stayed awake long after they slept. He had opened his door to a stranger. But something told him that this was only the beginning. Mara woke in patches, first the feeling of something soft beneath her, then the warmth of fire, and finally the familiar scent of her son nearby. Her eyelids fluttered open, vision blurred. Silver light danced across the ceiling beams of the cabin. Her breath came shallow, but she was breathing, not frozen, not dead. Her first instinct was to pull Mean closer. He was curled against her chest, wrapped in a blanket twice his size. His small fingers gripped her tunic like he was afraid she'd vanish again. She blinked, disoriented. Someone moved nearby. It was the human, the same one from her blurred memories before she passed out. He was sitting by the fire, adding more wood, watching the flames like they were going to whisper secrets. He turned when she stirred, his face lined with caution and concern. You're awake, he said quietly, almost like a question. She tried to sit up, pain shot through her side. She winced, collapsing back onto the rug. Take it slow, he said, crossing the room. He crouched beside her, holding out a mug. Warm broth, it'll help. Mara stared at him. Her people had always said humans were selfish, dangerous, but this one, he was not like the ones she remembered from the refugee docks or the trade stations. His hands were calloused but gentle. His eyes, dark and alert, held no judgment, only tired kindness. She took the mug slowly, her hands trembling. The warmth seeped into her skin. Where are we? My cabin, he said. Deep woods of Celesta. 4 storm hit hard. I found your son first. He led me to you. Mara looked down at Means. Her voice broke. He lived. Reed nodded. He's strong. Got that from you. Her eyes welled with tears. She turned away quickly. Means stirred then, letting out a soft noise before his eyes blinked open. He sat up and beamed when he saw her. Mama, he threw his arms around her. She cried then, truly cried. Not the silent tears of hiding or pain, tears of a mother who thought she had failed, who now held her child again. You found me, she whispered. Papa helped, he said, then blinked. I means the human. Reed chuckled from across the room. Either way, glad to be of use. Later that day, Mara sat propped against the wall, watching me nap on a pile of blankets near the fire. Her body ached, but it was healing. Her hands no longer shook. I should thank you, she said, voice rasping. Reed poured hot tea into a clay mug and handed it to her. No need. But I must, she said. You saved him and me. We were supposed to die out there. Reed raised an eyebrow. Why would anyone deserve that? She looked into the fire. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I was declared a burden. He didn't speak. He waited. When my mate died, our unit leaders said I offered nothing to the colony. No trade skills. No strategic value, only a child. They called him unauthorized reproductive result. Reed's hands clenched around his mug. They said the storm would weed out the weak. They locked me in a holding pen, said if I wanted to survive, I had to leave quietly. Reed stared at her. So you ran. She nodded, found a tunnel, carried Mean. They didn't chase us, didn't want to waste resources. Monsters, Reed muttered. Mara tilted her head. Not monsters, just efficient, cruel efficiency. That is what remains when compassion is seen as weakness. He shook his head. Compassion is the only thing keeping us human. But you're not of my kind. No, Reed said, but maybe that's what makes this work. I don't see or cast your laws. I see you, your son. You needed help, so I helped. She stared at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. That night, Mara had nightmares. Reed heard her before he saw her, shouts in another language, muffled sobs, rustling blankets. He rushed into the main room to find her sitting upright, gasping, hands clutching at her throat. "Mara," he said gently, "it's okay, you're safe." She flinched when he touched her shoulder. Don't take him again." "No one's taking him," Reed said. "Look, he's right here." Mean had already crawled into her lap, hugging her tightly. "No cold," the boy whispered, "no more cages." Mara's breathing slowed. She wrapped both arms around Mean and began to cry into his hair. Reed backed away, giving them space, but he didn't leave. He sat by the fire, keeping watch. The next morning, she looked hollow-eyed but more aware. "You stayed," she whispered. "Of course. My people wouldn't have." Reed shrugged. "Then they don't deserve you." Mara watched the fire for a long time. In the following days, she began to heal, slowly but clearly. She asked questions. She helped cook. She told Mean stories in their tongue and eventually began translating them for Reed. She found a rhythm. Mean had started to smile more, laugh. He drew stick figures in the ash near the fire. One looked like Reed with big boots and a square jaw. "That's you," the boy said proudly. Reed smiled. "Not bad, needs more hair though." Mara watched them silent, then whispered, "He hasn't drawn since the refugee ship, he used to love it." Reed looked at her. Maybe he just needed color again. She smiled faintly. But the piece was fragile. Reed noticed shadows outside the cabin, shapes that didn't move like animals. He kept it to himself, didn't want to frighten them, yet. One evening, as the snow began to fall again, Mean sat on Reed's lap, while Mara sewed old cloth into makeshift curtains. "Mama's eyes look better now," Mean whispered. Reed looked over. "Yes, they do. She used to look far away, now she looks here." Reed kissed the boy's head. "That's because she knows she's home." Mara looked up at that but said nothing. Her eyes, though, shimmered with more than firelight. The morning sun peeked weakly through the frosted window panes. It filtered in as pale gold, catching on dust motes and lingering wood smoke. Reed stood by the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal, the steam rising to warm his face. Behind him, Mean snored lightly, still bundled in his nest of blankets, while Mara sat cross-legged near the fire, her gaze steady but distant. She hadn't slept much. Reed had heard her packing quietly in the night, whispering to herself in her own language. At some point, she'd sat by Mean's side and just watched him breathe. There were still shadows under her eyes, not just from the storm, but from something older. Reed turned and offered her a bowl. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's hot." Mara took it with a nod. She didn't say thank you anymore. She didn't have to. There was a rhythm between them now, small, cautious, but real. "He sleeps deeply," she said quietly, watching Mean roll over and pull the blanket closer. "He's got a lot to recover from," Reed said. Mara hesitated, then asked, "Do human children talk in sleep?" "Sometimes. Why?" "He says words in dreams, things he would never say awake, things I wish he'd never heard." Reed stirred his own bowl, not answering right away. "They put him in a cell," she said flatly. "Not with me. They told him to watch me from a screen. When I cried, they muted the audio. They called it emotional dampening." Reed felt something tighten in his chest. "He never screamed," Mara continued. "He never even asked for me, because he thought if he made noise they would separate us permanently." Reed swallowed hard. What kind of people do that? Mara gave a bitter laugh, the kind who fear wasted resources. The door rattled as wind blew snow against it. Mara flinched. Reed stood. "You okay?" "They used to do that," she said, "knock on the doors before they came in, only twice, never 3 times. You remember every detail." "So does Mean," she replied, eyes hard. Reed walked over to the door, peeking out the small lookout slit. Nothing but trees and drifting flakes, yet a feeling crawled down his spine. That evening, while Mean drew in a corner and Reed chopped vegetables, Mara took a slow breath. "There is something I never told you," she said, "something Mean knows but never says." Reed looked up. "I was a technician before the war. I worked with thermal systems, basic wiring, nothing strategic. When the war came, I became useless. We were relocated. The weak, the unfit, the slow." "A class system," Reed said. "Yes, but worse, they created categories. If you were in designation Delta, you were marked, destined for replacement or disposal." Reed put down the knives. "You were Delta." She nodded. "They didn't kill us directly, they gave us impossible choices. Starvation, exposure, exile, they called it natural selection." Mean looked up. "They said we were extra weight on the ship, like boxes of broken parts." Reed knelt beside him. "You are not broken." I know, Mean said softly, because Mama never let me think I was. Later that night, Mean curled up near the fire with a storybook Reed had given him. Mara stood by the window, arms folded tightly. You gave him something I never could, she said. What's that? Stillness. He was born in movement, fleeing, hiding, but with you he learned to sit still and feel safe. Reed leaned against the doorway. You gave him survival, I gave him space. You were the reason he made it here. You were the reason he didn't die in the snow. Reed didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer slowly until they stood shoulder to shoulder. The cold glass separated them from the wild outside, but inside, the heat from the fire hummed through the air. Do you think they will come? She asked suddenly. Who? My people, not the ones who left us, the ones who think they still own us. Reed hesitated. I think someone might, I don't know when, but we should be ready. She nodded. Mean had fallen asleep with the book open on his chest. Mara walked over, brushed his hair back gently, then covered him with a thick wool blanket. She sat beside him, her fingers still trembling slightly but her face calm. He calls you safe man, she said suddenly. Reed blinked. What? When you're not around, he says, safe man brought us home. Reed sat down on the rug watching the fire. I never asked for any of this. Neither did I, she replied, but here we are. That night the dreams came again, for both of them. Reed saw himself in the factory, fire alarms blaring, people running, the ceiling caving in, hands reaching for him, too many to grab. He woke with sweat on his brow. Mara sat across the room, breathing fast, eyes wide open in the dark. You too, he asked. Every night. Reed nodded as he got up, made tea, handed her a cup. They sat in silence. The fire crackled softly, and the snow outside whispered across the roof. Maybe, Reed said finally, he'll grow up never having to remember the worst of it. Because of us, she said. Reed smiled faintly, because of all three of us. Mara looked at him, eyes glinting. He called you something else today, in our tongue, you didn't hear it. What was it? She paused, then said softly, Nassian, it means protector or chosen father. Reed looked down at his hands, rough, scarred, stained by years of machinery and solitude, then he looked at her. I'm honored, he said. She nodded, then for the first time she reached out and touched his hand. Just a touch. But it stayed. The days following their shared confessions were gentler. Mara began singing again, soft tunes in a minor key, words Reed didn't understand but felt. Mean hummed along, seated near the fire, sketching not just stick figures now but scenes. A tree with hanging wind chimes, a cabin in snow, a man with a glowing heart and wide shoulders beside a violet-skinned woman and a child in between. Reed fixed the loose panel in the roof. Mara restitched old blankets into proper curtains. She even carved a small charm from driftwood, inscribed with a symbol from her homeworld. It meant protection. But peace has a way of warning you before it ends, and Reed had lived long enough to listen. On the fourth morning, the air felt different. Not colder, heavier. Reed stood on the porch with a mug of tea, his eyes scanned the tree line. Birds were silent. Snow no longer fell softly, it drifted like ash. Mean was inside helping Mara boil water for soup. He had started calling her lessons Mama School and Reed's carpentry sessions Papa Practice. Reed took a long breath. Then it came. Not a howl, not a knock, but three sharp, deliberate bangs against the cabin door. Reed froze. So did Mean. Mara dropped the ladle, her eyes wide. She mouthed three. Reed stood up slowly and moved toward the door. Stay in the back room, he said. Lock the hatch from inside. Mara hesitated. Reed's. Do it, he said gently but firmly. She nodded and took Mean by the hand. The boy's eyes pleaded, but he didn't argue. The hidden latch beneath the cabin stairs clicked shut a moment later. Reed opened the doors. Three figures stood outside, cloaked in heavy ceremonial garb. Alien, taller than Mara, with gray-blue skin and sharp, proud features. Their eyes glimmered like stone. The lead one stepped forward. Human, he said, voice precise. That's me, Reed replied calmly. You are sheltering defectors. Reed didn't answer. A woman and her offspring, the alien continued. They are state-recalled assets. Their abandonment was a procedural removal. Your refusal to comply with our recovery order is a breach of interspecies neutrality law. Reed leaned against the doorframe. They're not assets, they're people. Irrelevant. Not to me. The alien's tone sharpened. You are interfering in internal reclamation. No, Reed said, I'm keeping my family safe. Another alien stepped forward. This one held a long device, not a weapon, but something like a scanner. He pointed it toward the cabin. A faint pulse lit up its surface. Life forms inside, he said, both confirmed. We gave them every chance, said the first. They declined resettlement. The storm was judgment. It was not meant to be interrupted. Reed took a step out onto the porch. So you left them to die. They were no longer viables. They were alive, Reed growled. And now they're more than that, they're whole again, and if you think I'm giving them up, you're going to have to come through me. The aliens narrowed their eyes. You will regret this. From behind, a small voice cut through the air. She is not broken. Mean stood just behind Reed now, arms shaking but voice steady. His silver eyes were wet but not afraid. She is my mother and you can't take her again. Reed turned, heart thudding. I told you to stay. I know, Mean said, but they need to hear me too. The lead alien's expression didn't change. Final warnings. Reed took a single step forward. Leave or I'll make you. The aliens held a long silence, then turned without a word and disappeared into the trees. Reed slammed the door shut and dropped the crossbar. Mara emerged from the back room, pale and trembling. How did they find us? Scouts, Reed said, or they saw smoke, doesn't matter now, they know. Mara dropped to her knees and held Mean tight. They will come again with more. Reed crouched beside her, then we get ready. That night they didn't sleep. Reed reinforced the windows with scavenged metal sheets. He built traps in the snow-covered path outside. Mara rewired an old heating coil into an emergency signal jammer. She showed Reed how to disable tracking chips. I disabled mine before I escaped, she said, but Means might still be active. They found it, a tiny silver dot embedded under his skin. Reed removed it with shaking hands and buried it in the woods. Now, he said, if they come back they won't know how close they are. Mean stayed quiet all day. He didn't cry, he didn't ask questions. But when Reed tucked him in that night, the boy whispered. They made Mama cry every day, now they want her to cry again. Reed smoothed his hair back. She's not going anywhere, neither are you, not without a fight. Later, Mara joined Reed outside by the firewood pile. You could walk away, she said, you could still live. Reed met her gaze. I already did that once, left a life behind, a job, people who needed me, I won't do it again. Even for someone not like you. He reached out and touched her hand. Especially for someone not like me. The final snows melted slowly under the reluctant warmth of spring. Icicles dripped from the cabin's eaves like slow tears, and green dared to rise through crusted earth. Inside, life began again. Mara's steps were firmer, Mean's laugh came easier. Reed built shelves, they dried fruit on hanging ropes. A painted wind charm swung outside the door, its soft clicks counting the wind's temper. But they all knew peace was a fragile flame. When the ship came, it didn't roar, it descended like a whisper. Reed spotted it first, a glint of silver over the ridge. It moved carefully as if afraid to scare the land. The insignia on its flank was unfamiliar, not the mark of the reclaimers who'd come before, something older, something official. Mean stepped to the window. Is that from Mama's world? Reed didn't answer, he didn't need to. Mara stood at the doorway, breath still. The ship landed gently in the clearing beyond the trees. Its engines cooled without a sound. And then a single figure emerged. She was tall, taller than Reed. Her skin was pale like Mara, but patterned with shimmering marks. She wore no armor, just a cloak of soft blue and a simple device on her wrist. She carried nothing but presence. Mara of Ilaven, she called in their native tongue. Mara stepped forward, cautious. You live. I do. We searched, the stranger said. Not all of us agreed with the purge. Some of us remembered the old ways. The council authorized a rescue once your signal appeared. Mara glanced at Reed. They found the tracker, he said, before we destroyed it. The woman nodded. You are well cared for. I am. Mara's voice was neutral. We can offer sanctuary, proper care, education for your son. You need not live like this. Mean peeked out from behind Reed. The woman saw him and softened. Little one, she said, you have grown strong. Mean held Reed's hand tighter. Mara looked at them both. This place saved me. We can give you more. They gave me more than survival, they gave me choice. The woman hesitated, then offered a small silver disc. This opens a gate, a portal. Should you change your mind, the key will remain yours. Mara took it slowly. She looked at Reed, then at her son. Thank you, she said, but I choose to stay. Mean smiled. Reed didn't speak, just felt something inside unclench. The stranger inclined her head. Then farewell, Mara of Eleven, safe path to you. She boarded the ship, the engines hummed. Within minutes the clearing was empty. Mean exhaled. She was nice. Mara nodded, but she doesn't know us, not like we do. That evening they lit a fire outside. Spring insects danced around the flames. Reed passed Mara a cup of warm cider. Mean munched on a seed cake he'd made himself. Why did you stay? Reed asked quietly. Mara looked up at the stars. Because when the storm came, the world turned its back, but you opened your door. She looked at Mean. And he opened his heart. Reed chuckled softly. I thought I was rescuing someone, turns out I was building something. A home, Mara said. Mean yawned and crawled into Reed's lap. Papa, he mumbled. Reed froze, the word still new. Mara smiled, he chose that, not me. Reed wrapped an arm around the boys. Then I'll earn it. They sat like that until the fire dimmed. Weeks passed, they planted roots, literal and emotional. Reed built a greenhouse. Mara sang while she worked. Mean learned both their languages and created his own written alphabet. One day, Mean carved a symbol into the cabin wall. When Reed asked what it meant, Mean said, "It means safe inside, like your heart." Reed looked at Mara. She was smiling softly, her eyes bright. Smart kid, he said. That night they added a second lock to the door, not because they feared anything. Because they had something to protect. And sometimes, the strongest homes are built not from wood or stone, but from the choice to stay. Spring bled slowly into summer, and the air around the cabin changed. Where once the wind howled like a warning, it now hummed softly through the new leaves. Creatures ventured closer. Small birds built nests beneath the eaves, unafraid. Reed found himself smiling more often. Mean woke each morning before sunrise, racing to check on the greenhouse where tiny fruits now sprouted like bright gems. Mara laughed more, not loudly but fully. She sang while cleaning tools, washing clothes, or hanging dried herbs above the stove. Her voice had changed. It no longer carried only sorrow. One afternoon, Reed returned from a supply run to the trade depot, a 2-day journey by sled. Mean sprinted to meet him, flinging his arms around his waist with a squeal. You came back. Told you I would. Mara appeared from the doorway, hands on her hips. Her smile said everything her words didn't. Reed handed her a small parcel. They had those sweet root candies you like. Her cheeks flushed faintly. You remembered. Always. That evening, after Mean had gone to bed, Reed stood on the porch, staring at the stars. Mara stepped beside him, pulling her shawl tighter. He dreams better now, she said. Reed looked at her. You too. I still dream, she said, but I don't wake screaming. He nodded. And you? My hands don't shake when I work anymore, that's something. Mara reached over and took his hand, not suddenly, not hesitantly, just easily. The stars blinked quietly above them, one streaked across the sky. What was that? Mara asked. Meteor or maybe a cargo ship, Reed said. Either way, not for us. Mara exhaled slowly. Good. Later, inside, they looked through the few remaining items from Reed's old life. A photo of his family, a broken compass, a journal with half-filled pages. Mean asked questions about the people in the picture. That was my mom, Reed said, pointing. She made the best blueberry jam. What's jam? Reed laughed. You'll find out someday. Did they leave you like Mama's people left her? Reed looked down. Not by choice, they passed, long time ago. Mean nodded solemnly, then crawled into his lap. Then you're part of our family now. We all have holes, but when we sit together they fill up. Reed blinked and his arms closed around the boy without thinking. Mara met his eyes from across the room. She said nothing, but her hand rested over her heart. In midsummer, they received a signal. A small drone buzzed overhead one morning, leaving behind a message disc. Mara examined it first. It bore a simple crest, not from the reclaimers, not from the rescuer who'd offered her a portal. A new symbol. She activated the message. A woman's voice played, calm and firm. To all survivors and independents, the Galactic Court has ruled against forced repatriation. Reclamation programs that abandon life are now in violation of treaty. Those who harbor survivors will not be punished. Instead, you will be honored for compassion. Reed, stunned, turned to Mara. She was crying, not from fear, from release. "They can't take us now," she whispered. Reed hugged her tightly. No, they never could, but now, the rest of the world knows it too. Their lives didn't change overnight, but the fear eased. Reed started teaching Mean how to repair old tech. Mara began writing songs again, this time with both their languages. They carved new symbols into the cabin door, 3 in total, 1 for each of them. Mean called it the door of choosing. It means we get to say yes or no to whoever knocks. Reed chuckled, smart kid. In autumn, they took their first trip beyond the woods together. The depot, once full of quiet suspicion, now welcomed them with nods and careful kindness. News had spread of those who had survived, not just physically, but with their hearts intact. Mean made a friend at the depot, a small girl with golden skin and a voice like wind chimes. They traded pebbles and drawings. Mara spoke with a trader who had once looked down at her. Now he listened, respectfully. Reed bartered for tools with a craftsman who admired his carpentry. "Your son's got your eyes," the man said. Reed paused, then smiled. "Yeah, maybe he does." The family returned to the cabin with baskets full and hearts full too. As winter neared again, they gathered what they needed: firewood, dried meat, seeds. Mean counted the jars and kept inventory like it was a game. Mara packed a special trunk labeled Emergency Joys. Inside were candies, carved toys, and soft things. "Because surviving isn't the same as living," she explained. Reed kissed her on the forehead that night. He didn't say anything.